the chat on the right and look at some of your peers in this business. Many of them are in Denver. Some really sharp people around the industry and really good resources to connect with and improve some of your own work and learn what each other are doing. So I strongly recommend chatting with some of them and getting to know them. Today we're going to talk about Scrum with Matt Belobraydic. I first got to know or encountered Matt about a year ago when he gave a talk about subsurface workflows for geology that leaned on his geomodeling experience. And when he started talking about automated top picking and streamlining workflows around code, I knew we had to connect. And here we are. I've really had a lot of fun watching some of the work he's been doing recently since leaving Schlumberger. He's now a geologist with the EERC, and I am sure will make waves over there. Let's see. One last thing is, as ever with these talks, if you have subjects that you'd like to see presented on, something you'd like to present yourself or somebody that you think we should reach out to, please send Mindy or I a message and we'll make it happen. With that, take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Kurt. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I also want to thank the Denver data drivers for hosting this talk. Again, my name is Matthew Belobraydic, formerly of Schlumberger. I'm currently with the Energy and Environmental Research Center at the University of North Dakota. And this talk really kind of came about more as a conversation starter. So we're going to not get into a lot of fine detail, but hopefully enough to kind of whet your appetites and move forward, maybe pulling it into what you're doing. And a lot of what I'm going to show is what I have seen as a practical user by participating on a Scrum team and observing it within Schlumberger. I have requested a few additional people attend this meeting. They are Scrum certified Scrum Masters, as well as some of my former teammates are on the chat. So hopefully if I can't answer a question to your satisfaction, one of them will be able to do it today. And with that, we will kick this off. Most of us are in oil and gas. And so if you start to think, if you were to start up a new basin, what would it take to do it? Build a new team, digitize the data you need to use if it's not already there, correlate and interpret all of your wells, start building together your KPIs and type curves and production information, add a whole bunch of new tools that are there, and then build a geomodel. And building that in a team of 7, how many people would you put, how long would you put on that? That's kind of where I was back in 2018. How I know a lot of what goes into that. Many of you in the oil and gas industry know what kind of work goes into that. And so it really isn't a question of the how, it's really how long would it take. And if I told you 4 months for a full basin, you would start questioning that. Well, what did you leave out? What didn't happen? And the only reason we were able to get that done and get it done twice in that 4 months is because of Scrum. So what is it? If you're starting to hear a lot more about agile workflows and process management, Scrum falls under that umbrella. It was designed by 2 gentlemen to kind of pull this together to where you're doing the work and immediately delivering. So the idea is that you're bringing to the market the most valuable things for your business. And usually 20% of what you do every day is the most 80% of your value for what you're doing. Originally, this was for software. And if you do a full project in like a waterfall design where you do one task, then the next task, then the next task, and if you get off schedule, you try to move things around to get back on schedule. When you're 6 months down the line and you find out that something major has changed back in the initial part of this, you've missed your target. And that's what they were finding in software, is that when they would ask somebody what they needed, by the time they could deliver it, they were missing the mark all the time. And so they designed the Agile Manifesto. If you look it up, they were trying to get to market faster with these smaller increments. And Scrum provides a lightweight framework that really embraces this as iterative and incremental. And so the projects become little iterations called sprints, usually 1 to 4 weeks, and you get a deliverable product at the end of it. And in software terms, that's really easy. You find out you can log into your website. There's a database behind what you're doing. There's pictures of the thing that you want to buy on your website. Those kind of things are easy to do. But how do you get this to work in oil and gas is really kind of a question. So taking the idea and moving forward, I want to kind of pause and take everybody through what this empirical process is like. And since we're all virtual now, it's a little bit more difficult to do. So this is one of the things that I've done with my team. And I know they're gonna harp on me because I've made this a little bit more palatable for what happened as opposed to what really happened. But I'm sure Dave will not let me hear the end of it afterwards. But here's the exercise. We're going to have a team of 5 people. We're going to make paper airplanes, and we're going to do it in 2 minutes. It's fold as many as we possibly can. We're going to stand on one side of the room, and we're going to call it a win if the airplane hits the opposite wall. And then in 2 minutes, we're going to plan on how we're going to spend the next 2 minutes to get more to hit the wall on the other side. So there we go. We're going to make our plan, and we're going to get 2 minutes to do that plan. And then we're going to fold and throw against the wall. And that's pretty much it. That's what we've decided to do, and to get our goal of how many we can do to hit the wall. So in our first sprint, let's say our team folded 6 paper airplanes, and for the most part, all of them have hit the wall on the other side. Now, if you're part of that team, you're not happy with that. You want to go back and you want to try this again. So we're going to do another sprint. We're going to try and plan and figure out what we're going to do different to get that number up even higher. So we're going to do 2 minutes of planning and a little bit of a post-mortem of what we did, and we're going to go back into the plan and do it again. This time we're going to make a few innovations. We're going to provide some verbal feedback. We're going to talk to each other as we're making the paper airplanes. Maybe we decide, hey, we like one design over another design. How are we going to make sure we communicate so our 2 minutes is as productive as possible? Another one that came up in the one we actually did is that we immediately decided we needed a designated thrower. So that designated thrower is going around picking up the paper airplanes everybody's making. They're positioning themselves against the wall and throwing it to the opposite wall. So when we do that, our count went up. So one, because everybody now remembered how to make paper airplanes, and the other part of it was that we started standardizing the process. So if we go through this whole thing again, where we plan, think about what we've done, and start it up again, another good one would be assembly work. Someone's doing a couple of folds and passing it on. It's easier to fold something 3 times than going through the entirety of a paper airplane. And so you've reinvented the assembly line. So that innovation makes things go a little bit faster. And let's say we get 25 paper airplanes and 25 hit the wall. Well, this is all well and good. We're now really efficient at making paper airplanes in 2 minutes, but unlike anything else in the real world, that's not going to hold true all the time. So the objective changed. So now we need at least 5 of the paper airplanes to hit a target on the wall that score a 5 or better. And that's the kind of stuff that happens in our projects, where we're chugging along, we're doing an analysis, we're trying to figure something out. And hey, by the way, can you use that analysis to decide something else? Does it work in this other way that you didn't think of before? Well, when you're iterating these sprints out, now we can kind of account for that. And while our 25 airplanes hit the wall, only 3 of them hit the target. We can go through this process over and over again and waste lots and lots of paper to try to meet these objectives as we go through. Maybe the objective changes and we need the longest glide time in the room. But that's essentially what we're trying to go through, is these iterations, changing the work, making it to where it's working the best possible for the goals that we understand. And that right there is the empirical process. That's what you're trying to get to. So Scrum's an empirical method. It's iterative. It's the facts you know now. It's got these learnings, retrospectives, feedback loops to build a sum of something that is better than if you just go through this process once. Has some major pillars and values. So transparency. Obviously, if you don't know what everybody else is working on, that's not a good thing. But also, if management doesn't know what the project team's working on, or the project team doesn't understand what management wants, that is where things start to fall apart. Inspection. Every part of this, you're going back and feeding back into itself, trying to figure out what's good, what's bad, what's working. And then adaptation is that piece. If the goals change, what can we use and move towards that goal now that's a higher priority than the one we had before? The values are pretty typical. You're going to see those in just about anything, but you empower your people to have courage to say, no, I can't do that. I have to do this, or they have to really get the focus on, and that's really what I like about Scrum, is that there's the focus of what my task is, what I need to achieve in the 2-week process to come out and be done with this at the end. Commitment, it's a huge commitment to everyone on the team. That's a lot of buy-in. It's a huge commitment for management to let the process work. Respect and openness, again, those are pretty standard things. But anytime I've seen a problem with a Scrum team, it can always be traced back to one of these 8 words here on this slide, almost always. If something's not being upheld in the pillars or not being upheld in the values, the whole system falls apart. So I just want everyone to kind of think on how we work in oil and gas. Usually we work from a set of data. It's coming in from the wells, it's legacy data, it's something that we've worked with before, or have a new access to it. And we do an analysis. So our petrophysicist makes the petrophysical interpretation that gets passed on to a geologist that's doing structural and geomodeling type things. And then that can go to an engineer who's going to go do simulation or tune it to production or something like that. This is a very siloed structure on how we look at these domains. Not necessarily these people are siloed and not working together, but the domain and how it works is very siloed. The problem is, how do you change that workflow to something that looks like this, to where all of the planning and thinking is converted to an empirical process, this Scrum process, to where how do we get out of this exactly what we got before, but in a way that can fit in a sprint, whether it's 1 to 4 weeks. It is not stepping on anybody, that the geomodel has to be there before simulation can work. That's a given. So there is an incremental analysis that everybody has to be working on and building upon one another. How do you get all the things that you need to get and still bring it into this kind of project team? So that's a major problem here. And if you're counting this little looping diagram with all of the arrows and everything, this is the 4th time you've seen a version of it. The next slide, we're going to dive into what exactly this is, where the people fit in here, what all these little pieces are. But I want you to really think, when you are doing your work on your team, whatever your team is, the process that you do from input to output really doesn't change when you go to Scrum. It's the increments on which you do that and how that works and breaking it into the sprint. So that's really where our industry is going to have the most trouble of building these Scrum teams. I know some people have been very successful, but it's not something you can just jump into without any planning, is kind of what I want to say. So this is the big one. If you want, we can share out these slides so you don't have to make your own or anything like this. Everything in this presentation, I I put together, so there's no images that you can't have. I don't own the Scrum concept, so you can't just run with that. But let's kind of start with how we build this. Let's go with the pointer here. Whoops, of course that doesn't work. There we go. So this is where most things start, right there in the project backlog. If you think of a project that you're going to do, you're going to list out all the tasks you want to do. There's going to be people that own the project, people that want it done, people that are most interested in how this all kind of goes together and to get the learnings that you're going to be putting out. So the project backlog is just that. It's a list of all the things that need to be done, and it's prioritized by this person right here, the project owner. Scrum calls it product owner, but that's really kind of hard for oil and gas because the products that you're making are usually focused around a field or a basin or something like that. So we might want to change it to product owner later, but right now it's a little easier to understand if it's a project owner. So that project owner is going to go through, let's say that the first task is petrophysics, the next task is geomodeling, and the third task is some sort of engineering. And all of those tasks are going to be user stories, and we'll get into what a user story is later on what needs to be done. So the stakeholders give the buy-in, they're going to give feedback, we like this, we don't like this, and it's going to be a constant conversation between the project owner and the stakeholders on what goes into that project. So this is our team, our Scrum team, and in sprint planning, they're going to pull over the most high priority tasks that they can and that they have capacity to do. So that's one of the things that they negotiate with the project owner, that here's what we're able to do, how fast we can do it in our given sprint, and kind of negotiate what it is that we're going to do. So this is where we come up with the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is the same thing that's in the project backlog, just what we're going to work for in the 1 to 4 week sprint. I'm going to start saying 2 week sprint because that's usually what everybody does, just because it's a nice medium length. So in our 2 weeks, we're going to be working on everything in our sprint backlog. And this project team is going to do a daily stand-up. And we have the project owner, and this purple person we've not talked about is the Scrum Master. If they're on the project team, great. If they're not working on actual projects, they don't get to talk in the stand-up. The stand-up is the 15-minute Scrum meeting that you have every day. And then that's the main touch point that the team has together. And the whole point of that team is what did you do yesterday? What are you planning on doing today? And what are your major holdups? What is blocking you from getting your work done? And the whole point of that is when a task gets onto the sprint backlog, it doesn't get just brought over by one person. The entire team is responsible for that task. So the task has to be worked on. And when deadlines come in, excuse me, everybody's working on those to make sure that they push it over the goal line to get the increment done. So the Scrum Master is best described as a servant leader. And I know Kevin and Katie are going to decide that that's not the most best way of saying that. But the Scrum Master is the person that tries to keep everybody honest with those 8 terms that we talked about before, the 3 pillars and the 5 values. They want to make sure everybody's communicating together, everybody is doing what they say they're going to do, they're expressing that where those bumps in the road are. And that's the person that can go out to management and say, hey, this is kind of what we need help with, and kind of grease the wheels a little bit. Usually they track everything. This is part of that transparency part of the burn down chart, where this is how much we're going to do in the sprint backlog, and this is how much we've completed, and hopefully you hit 0 is left to do at the end of your sprint. So that's the whole point of the burn down. After you've done your 2 weeks, then the whole sprint, out comes an increment. Is that increment a core, digitized core library? Is it a geomodel? Is it petrophysics for 10 wells? Is it the dashboard for all of your production history? whatever that is, whatever you decided was going to be in the sprint backlog, that's what you're delivering. And you're delivering it into the sprint review. So that's when the Scrum team can sit down with all of the stakeholders, say, look, this is what we did. Here's the demo of what we did that usually works best. And what do you think about it? For a 2-week sprint, that's about a 2 to 3 hour meeting. That's all it is. And after that 2 to 3 hour meeting, any new tasks that the stakeholders come up with go right back into the backlog. And then the Scrum team goes into a retrospective. Prior to Scrum, I had never been a part of a postmortem, save for one project. And it was after about a 12-month project. We went through and we talked about how the project went. And I couldn't remember anything that happened in the beginning. I could remember some of the stuff that happened in the middle, but most of it was focused towards what we did at the end, which was mainly scramble to get everything done and get the report and presentation out the door. Doing a retrospective every 2 weeks on what you did well, that's another thing, what you want to start and stop doing, where the whole team is really kind of holding each other's feet to the fire. It's very, very good because you can then go back into planning, knowing what you want to do differently about the next sprint backlog and into the next sprint. And it makes the team much more cohesive and much more powerful on knowing what they can do and what is more expected of them the next time around. Oh, that was a lot. So this conversation just started with Scrum, and probably more about it than you needed to know in this quick recap. But this really is just the starting point. There are books and books about this and how this works and how to get the most out of your team, how to get the most out of your management. And it all focuses around this system, this empirical iterative process, which it's really designed to make as little waste as possible. The ritualization of all of these things, so you've got artifacts of the backlog, the sprint backlog, the increment, and the burn down chart. The ritualization of it allows it to be simple. Everybody knows where everything is. The meetings are 1 15-minute every day during the sprint, 2 to 4 hour meeting for review, another 2 to 4 hour meeting. Let's see, this should be about an hour or 2 hour retrospective, and then another hour or two in sprint planning. And then you're right back into the sprint. There's a lot of other things that the individual people here can do. But mostly what I kind of want to focus on is if anything should change in your project backlog, you have major changes that can be immediately addressed in the next 2-week sprint. And that's really, really quite powerful. So we started this conversation with how would you on a basin? And to do a full basin with an inexperienced team, as a consultant, I would choose that would be about 12 months. To do it in 4 months is a third of the time. And that's really, really impressive, because in that 4 months that Scrum made possible, we built a successful prototype on how to build a basin analysis to go to market. That was the whole point, was that we were going to sell an interpretation that we could then build upon. It was a constant iteration. It was constant feedback. The team was really focused to deliver the most powerful pieces. What we delivered from the 7-member team in the 8 sprints was a core library. That core library was fully digital. That was out the door, I think, after sprint 2. The petrophysics we did twice. And not only did we do it twice, we adopted a new random forest log cleanup technique to make sure all of our logs were really good. And then we tried a couple of different clustering algorithms that some worked, some didn't, and then eventually decided on what worked best for our data set. So we got through petrophysics twice on those iterations. We did well correlation 3 times. We had 3 different geos working on the same set of tops. And if you've ever worked with other geologists on exactly where you want to pick a top, that gets to be quite frustrating. But we elevate it from bronze to silver to gold and everybody synchronizing together on what was supposed to be there. Production was probably the most important one that we had going on. The production took in the raw production data for the state. They did a QA/QC process that they developed in Python and SQL. It was a combination workflow. They ended up doing a dashboard every sprint at just about. I think there was 7 sprints that we delivered a production dashboard. The one that we didn't, we transferred from Power BI to Spotfire. So I'll give them, when you're learning a whole new software, you don't get to just crank things out every time. And then the geomodel we did twice. So 2 times on the geomodel as the tops came through and as the petrophysics came through, we were able to do the geomodel twice. So I am a very firm believer that Scrum gets things done. But it's not without its challenges. For a consulting group of specialized experts, there obviously, you're going to have challenges. So one of the big one was configuring the tasks. So like I said before, user stories is how you build up the tasks that you need to do. They have to be very specific. They have to work within your plans for what needs to be done before, more advanced things happen. And then you're trying to look for a critical mass of completeness. You don't want words like all. So this is a typical user story. As a petrophysicist, I want a library of all core data so that I can tune my petrophysical models. Is it unrealistic? No, it's not unrealistic. Is it possible to do in 2 weeks when you've not seen the data? Yes, it's 100% impossible because you don't know what's going to go into that. What's more realistic is that you make a whole bunch of tasks that tune that back a little bit. As a petrophysicist, I want 10 core analysis files digitized so that I can add them to my core library. That's much more realistic. I can set up that maybe I want to do some OCR, or I just want to brute force it and 10 key it all in. I can do 10 files within probably a day, maybe a day and a half, depending on how long they are, to kind of get that through. So whenever you're doing a task, you have to figure out how to make that work within your time limit, but also make it specific enough so when it comes to how is this done, and we'll talk about acceptance criteria in a little bit, that it is an accepted and complete piece of work that can be used forward. The other one is T-shaped expertise. So a lot of us have this expertise in one realm. Some of us, that might get wider depending on your skill set, but you've got a lot of other skills that you know kind of how to do, but you can help out. And this is really where being on a team, it kind of shines. You end up helping out in all of the places where you know how to help out just a little bit to kind of lighten the load if you've got all of your stuff done. And that's really helpful because you all own all of the tasks that are due that sprint. And that kind of alleviates any of the bottlenecks on any one individual. You can go through and evaluate somebody else's work. So I'm not an expert in petrophysics, but I can go through and build cross plots and go, okay, porosity and permeability, these make sense with what we know of the facies and things like that. And kind of QC that data. The last one, acceptance criteria, getting to done, you really have to start to think what's important for your analysis. So do you want all the core data done? If you're not interested in some of the formations, do you skip them? If you can't read them, if the logs aren't good enough for a couple of wells, but you've got other close by wells that have much better data, do you skip them for later? All of those become questions on, what exactly is done, because if your ultimate goal is to figure out what acreage to buy next, well, having the granularity of every single well in a very dense field doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You want to spread that out and make sure that you can answer those types of questions. So what that return on investment is for each one of these, going back to the all core in my database ready to go, you start to wonder, is that something that's important for me now? Or can I push that into another user story that goes back onto the backlog that's much further down the line? And eventually, if we get there, we get there. if no other priority items come up. So successes. These are the things that I really like about Scrum. Live demos. Not that you don't write reports. Obviously, you have to write reports. In the one project that we did a poster at the end of it. We also did a talk that went to, I think it was AAPG. So we do documentation. Everyone needs documentation, but in the interim, you don't necessarily have to document everything very officially. All of your tasks have all your notes and how things got put together and what got done by who. And then inside of a lot of the softwares that we use, we could go back and look at the history of how things were assembled. Doing that sprint review that was right in Trello and Python and Spotfire and Techlog, we could pull up something, and if there was a question for a stakeholder, we could immediately change the map or map something else to kind of answer that question on the fly, which was really nice. We didn't have to predict what the stakeholders wanted to see at the end. Faster velocities. As the team coalesced, that whole forming, storming, norming, and performing, that's very evident. The people that you have, as they get more comfortable with each other, they're going to take a little bit more risk. That courage aspect comes out. You're going to take bigger and bigger tasks, more task story points as you go through, and kind of load up your sprint. So over time, you're going to see things go up much higher in your task, and they're all going to try to get down to 0 at the end of your sprint. Those things just kind of happen as the team kind of builds on itself. I do know if you kind of change your team halfway in between, you've got to account for rebuilding this back up. But the faster and faster velocities as people began to trust one another, it was just part of that process. And the retrospectives, I can't say enough about postmortems. I think it's something that we don't do as an industry enough, at least from my observations. It built our working relationships. There are people that have different working styles. Some people are very detailed oriented, some are very big picture oriented, and having them work together, they butt heads. So this gave a possibility of everybody sits down and says, you can't work like this. You got to work together a little bit different. Process improvements. Things come up that we want to use random forest to edit our curves. We think we can get that done. We can learn that and get it done and working faster than actually editing any other way. Automating a lot of how the maps went out or how the model got put together. Those were all things that we could talk about and discuss and try to make what we were working on work better for us. And then recognition of work. And I really wish I could get the images of the stickers we end up giving each other, but these stickers that we were rewarding each other for good work end up being a velocity driver. People that had 30 plus years of oil and gas experience are on a team with other people that aren't there for very much time at all, and they're giving each other stickers on work well done. I should have dug out my notebook. I've got them all dated on who gave them to me and everything else. It's just one of those things that, hey, I know you're working hard and I appreciate what you've done. I think that's it's really kind of nice for a team to come together like that. And I wouldn't have expected it. I don't think all Scrum teams do that. I know some of them do bells and things like that. But it's very, very nice to kind of come together as a group and work that way. So in conclusion, the process works. If you can get over the challenges of how you break up your tasks, getting your team formed together, getting all the buy-in from management, getting your team to buy in, you can get it to work. And you're going to get to work faster and better than your more siloed type of things. Is it going to work in every situation? No. It's really for managing complex problems. And that's mostly what we see in oil and gas. How do you get a full understanding of what's here to kind of build upon itself and come up with the best answers and the best science on what we do every day? buy-in is required. You have to have that buy-in. If management pulls the rug out from under you and says, hey, we need you to perform more and more and more, that negotiation on what you can do for a sprint, that's the team telling you we can do X amount. Now, obviously, if they're constantly sandbagging, the Scrum Master is going to hold them accountable, and they're going to have to eventually move up. But when you've got a team that's performing really well together on all cylinders, they're going to move up and perform better and better together. And plus, you're getting to focus on what is the most valuable. So that project owner is making sure the team is pushing towards those valuable pieces first, and then coming back and doing the cleanup and things that are next on the list for return on investment. So with that, and I didn't start my timer, I want to thank everybody for listening today and kind of open it up for questions. I saw that the chat was kind of going crazy for a little bit in the corner of my eye. So if I can't answer it, there are people on the line that should be able to help.
Thanks, Matt. That was awesome. There was one question in the chat, and I think we've talked about it a little bit. With the people that are involved with planning the sprints, so you have the project owner, the Scrum Master, and the stakeholders. Can those be the same person in cases, or is it important for them to be different, or how does that get managed?
So in the one I was a part of, I was the project owner and I was a team member. You don't want your project owner and your Scrum Master to be the same person, because technically they're at odds against each other. The Scrum Master is there to protect the team, and the project owner is going to want more and more work done. Same with the stakeholders. They're going to want more and more work done. And so there's that Scrum Master is the cartilage, if you will, between the team and the project owner and the stakeholders, to make sure that the team is doing good work, quality work, and as much work as they can without overworking them. You want to keep this to a 40-hour week. Well, you want to keep people to where they're comfortable working. We did have one person on our team that liked to work and burn the midnight oil and then come in at really weird hours and do all the work. And so that's something you have to have them work together. There's work contracts that you can do on a team. They talk about that in some of the Scrum courses. But yeah, your project owner can be a team member, your Scrum Master can be a team member, but those other things that they're doing are important and in conflict, so they can't be the same person. Yeah, it was all stickers, then it blew up. Oh, I see that. Mito, why do I think the reference was me and Janelle? Oh, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit more about the burn down chart and how the difference maybe between the Scrum Master's role and simply being a task manager?
Let's see, where did that scrum down? I think that was a success slide. There we go. So the Scrum Master really is there to promote Scrum, the values and pillars of Scrum. They're there to make sure that no one is having hindrances in their work. So they're looking for if they need training on something, or if they're waiting for a piece of data to come in, something like that. It's really someone there to grease the wheels. It's that servant leader piece that's really important. So they're not there to tell the person or the people that are doing the work or trying to get the work done how to do the work. They're really there to protect the sanctity of the iterative process. That, you know, if you want, let's do it this way. So if a stakeholder happens to be the CEO of your company and comes in the middle of your sprint and says, I want you to change everything that you're doing and work on this, it's the Scrum Master to help them understand what Scrum is, and the project owner to kind of go, look, this is something that, you know, we can put into the backlog, we can schedule it for the next sprint, and we can work with you for that. But what the team is working on is what they've committed to focusing on, and that's where we want them to continue to work. So we will get to what you're asking for. As soon as this sprint is done, we will make that priority one for the next sprint, but we don't want to take them out of the zone. And that's really what Scrum helps with, is keeping that team in the zone for longer, for focusing and getting them to deliver what was important at the beginning of the sprint. Ooh, Tyler's got a good question. What should the size of a Scrum team be? It works best between 3 and 9. That's one of the things that all the literature says, between 3 and 9. If you're less than 3, you're not really a team. If you're more than 9, it's just too many people, and you should probably break up into 2 different Scrum teams. So while we've only kind of looked at this from this perspective of a single team doing the work, you can imagine a lot of these loops feeding out of the same backlog. You wouldn't want multiple backlogs there. You would just have it kind of feed into different teams. But then the acceptance criteria becomes very important, because other teams might be leaning on what you're doing in this sprint on their next sprint. Let's see. Mark Ballard, is there a rule of thumb of how often you should be doing sprints? Would you do 1 sprint a month, or is it a year-round? Yes, it's continuous. So once you start this, the whole process is to be continuous. It's to alleviate some of the complexities. If you think of a big project, you're constantly meeting with people, and you're going out and talking to different people, or you have to set up different things on what you have to do. The whole point is to keep your team as focused for as long as possible. So they have the 15-minute touch point between themselves daily, and then every duration of your sprint. So after the 2 weeks is up, you're doing a review, retrospective, plan, and then right back into the next sprint. You've got to plan your vacations accordingly. So if someone goes on vacation in the middle of a sprint, well, they're only going to be there for a little bit, and you've got to plan that accordingly. You don't want to change your duration of your sprint. We did that, I think, once. We ended up at the end of it, the second to last sprint, we had a deliverable that needed to be there, and we had this really weird week before we were closing out the project. And so we added that 1 week onto one of the sprints. It makes things a little weird, because it's hard to plan what you're always going to be doing if you start moving things around. So the idea is that you really want to be that continuous flow to keep things as simple as possible. Michael Hardy, can a member of a multiple Scrum team at one time? No. So the whole goal is that you are on one team that works together really, really well, and that you're all working on the same set of tasks. So while you are part of multiple assets, what you would end up doing is that maybe your product would be the stratigraphy and modeling of that. So the people on your team would all be working together to build the stratigraphy top picking and then do the model. So you would have to shuffle your team to where you're kind of working on the same kind of product every time to get the increments out. Now, that does lead into another thing of maybe that makes us more siloed. And then you have to have a touch point of what the acceptance criteria really are. Or you can do, like you suggest, one team per asset. Or you have one team that kind of rotates between assets. So they work on one asset for 2 weeks, then another asset for 2 weeks, and you just keep going through. So everybody's getting a little bit at one time, but there's going to be a 4-week delay between when you get things next. Let's see. Did I miss anything else, Kurt?
Zach just asked about if you use any project planning tools, and then another person asked about the resources involved, and so how lean of a company might, or of a group might use this. Is it even applicable to startups?
It's very applicable to startups. I mean, this came from the software world where they're building all kinds of things really fast. So you might have a team that's working on if we take it back to software, maybe they're working on one of the algorithms that's going to work. Another one's working on the user interface. Another team is working on these other pieces. But really, where the power of this is, I can take it back to our project for the production piece of it. They had a very big Python part of that, and I'm an okay Python programmer, so I could step in and do the Python programming that they need or didn't have experience with, while I didn't understand the algorithms that I was coding for doing the decline curve or the KPIs. I didn't know how they worked. I just knew where I needed to do the loop in order to make that function work successfully. So it comes back to that T-shaped piece where everybody on the team is doing a little bit different stuff. And so maybe you're all working on different parts of the software or different parts of the project, but then you're able to lean on each other for when crunch time comes.
And I don't know, I know there's some people on the chat who have some experience using this approach inside their own company. So maybe others have views as well, but do you have any comments about tools, whether it's software or just methods for helping you manage the projects through a Scrum project?
So in the middle of our project, I realized that DevOps was going to be a lot better than what we were using. But what I was using at the time was Microsoft Teams. All communication went through Teams. We used the Planner plugin for our Scrum board. So I had one column that was the project backlog, and then each sprint had its own to-do, in process, needs testing, and then done. And so that kind of went, yeah, Kanban, exactly. So the Scrum board is almost identical to a Kanban board. I saw someone said index cards. If you have a co-located team, absolutely. You can put it up on the wall. Post-its work, dry board works. However, you can kind of put together the ERC use Smartsheet. I just found out that we can do a Kanban type board in Smartsheet. It takes a little bit more setup than I'm used to, but we could build it that way that you kind of put it all together. It really doesn't matter what you use. If you want to use a shared Excel file, it's possible. It's really just a way to track it. But a lot of those end up being a little bit easier, like DevOps and I think Smartsheet both have ways to automatically do your burn down chart. Otherwise, you kind of hack it together with something in Python or Excel or something like that. Yeah, Katie, I figured you would be much more on the tactile side to physically move those cards. Kind of like when I'm doing a notebook and I like to cross something out. Yeah. Mito saying that he liked the Azure DevOps. I think what's nice about DevOps is that if you're doing coding, you can have those different versions of code. It's very similar to GitHub. One of my in projects on GitHub that I've not shared, I've got a kind of like a Kanban board that I can kind of put that. So if you've ever wanted to test it, you could do it that way. Let's see, Matt, did you find any confusion between the roles of project manager, product manager, and Scrum Master? So yeah, so that's a big thing. So project managers don't really have a role in Scrum. You could have someone that's kind of like the overarching stakeholder of, if you're doing like a scrum of scrums where you've got multiple teams kind of making sure everything in the backlog is going the way you want. And then you would have maybe individual product owners to kind of move through. But the Scrum Master really isn't a project manager. They're really there to facilitate getting the people that are doing the work to their maximum potential. That's probably the best way to say it, is that's their entire goal, is that, look, we're doing an iterative process. Let me help coach you on what that iteration is, and then protect the team and hold the team accountable for the work that needs to be done. Help the product owner or project owner to keep the stakeholders from screwing anything up. It takes a lot of buy-in. It really does. But a lot of these agile processes are there to kind of move towards more work from your team members. Do you want to talk about scope creep? No, I don't want to talk about scope creep. Everybody hates scope creep, but in Scrum, scope creep doesn't occur. If something comes up that's more important than what you already have on your backlog, it goes to the top. If it needs to be completely change everything that you've done prior, stakeholders have to be aware of that. If you're going to take this team that's been moving in one direction and completely derail them, it's going to take them time to move over and figure out where it goes next. But the whole point is that you're always doing the highest priority work off that backlog. A lot of people use the Moscow method. So that's must have, should have, could have, won't have. Simplicity really has that piece of, we are not going to do this work. It doesn't make sense to digitize SP only logs in the middle of a field where you have high tiered data. You're not going to get out of it what you want. So that won't happen. I'm not going to do that. I will flat out refuse to do it. If it's in its own place, way out, yeah, maybe that needs to be done. But any sprint that you do should be about 60% must have, and then split between should and could have about 40%. And that allows you to kind of build on your technology of, do I want to try a new software that I've never looked at before? But those must-haves are really what's bringing the value to your project or your product. Scope creep doesn't happen. No, but it's true. If you're organizing your backlog correctly, then those high priority items really come up to the top. And that's really what's most important.
Well, I know we're about to lose all the people to the RMAD session today, but I really want to thank you a lot for doing this. One of the things that I think is really neat about this approach is some of the ways that it plays on some cognitive things in our heads. So the retrospective component, where the team gets to reorganize and think about how it will change its own behavior, builds buy-in. And there's a couple of things about the way this is designed that engineer buy-in into the project. It's pretty neat stuff that I'm not terribly well familiar with, and loved Matt's introduction to it. Thank you so much for putting this together. I know you put a lot of work into putting this together and for sharing it with us.
Yeah, please reach out on LinkedIn if we're not already connected and you want to learn more. If I don't have the answer, I know who to point you to. So there's only two Matt Belobraydics in the world, and the other one's my cousin, so he'll point you to me.
And I think if you send us the slides, we'll distribute it to everybody on the email list. If you're not on the email list and would like to be, send Mindy or I a message, and I'll probably put it on the LinkedIn page as well. Great session. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Matt.